We've officially made it to August. Training camp is in full swing, and today we dive into studs and duds in the Ravens open stadium practice at M&T Bank Stadium on Saturday next year on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And we are back with another episode here of Locked On Ravens. I'm your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire. And of course, we're here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And thank you so much for making Locked On Ravens your first listen of the day here. I really do appreciate that. We're free and available on all platforms, including on YouTube. And today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline, as you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts, and we're back, and we are officially in August. We're at August 1st here, and that means preseason football. We're on the horizon. The Ravens, their first game coming up less than 2 weeks away, and again, not so sure how many veterans are going to see. I'm going to probably say not a lot. I think the Ravens will probably take a bit of a cautious approach, but we were able to see most of the Ravens out there on the field, not the necessarily guys who are working their way back from injury, but we got to see a lot of those Ravens on the field on Saturday night. The Ravens hosted their open stadium practice, and there were a lot of takeaways from it, and I want to dive into studs and duds from the practice because there were guys who had really, really, really good days. I want to highlight those guys. There were a couple that didn't, though, and I want to talk about those guys as well. Definitely more studs than duds, especially it being so early in training camp. But so in the first segment, we'll talk about offensive studs and duds. In the second segment, we'll do defensive studs and duds. And then in the final segment, we'll talk about the whole dynamic of pads coming on in these practices and what it means, what I personally would like to see moving forward, guys I'd like to hear more from, etc., etc. So a ton to talk about here on the show. If you are here with us in video form, though, I do appreciate you watching. You see my face, my background, everything here. Be sure to subscribe to our channel here on Locked On Ravens. Like this video as well. Our next goal here is 3,000 subscribers, and thank you to everybody who's already subscribed. I really appreciate your support in keeping up along here with the show. And if you're wondering why you should subscribe here on YouTube, we put out daily Ravens content 5 days a week. So we have training camp updates, we have analysis, news, everything here to the day, Monday through Friday. We have it here covered on YouTube. And also we have it covered in audio form at anywhere you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify. Thank you so much for tuning in audio form. If that is where you're listening today, I greatly appreciate it, whether you're on your way to work, on your way home from work, in the car, wherever. Thank you for tuning in. It's the same show, both audio and video form, so you're not missing out one way or the other. If you want to do audio one day, video the next day, kind of flip-flop a little bit, hey, that's totally okay. Totally fine with me. But thank you again to everybody for your support here for the show. If you want to leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, I greatly appreciate that as well. And also be sure to follow me on Twitter at ChaosStriker34 and the Locked On Ravens account at Locked On Ravens. And now we teleport to the future. This is future me talking to you. And around the 20-minute mark, the audio and video disconnects again. And again, I don't know why this keeps happening, but I did want to just say it so that when you get to that point and the audio and video kind of goes awry and my voice isn't lined up with the video, you kind of not thinking, oh, well, why is that happening? I'm telling you it happened. And again, I apologize for that, but the content's still great. The audio's still great. So just wanted to say that, but let's dive into that content now. Let's now dive into some offensive studs and duds of the Ravens during their training camp practice open at M&T Bank Stadium on Saturday. And so you had a lot of ways to digest this. You could either be there at the stadium, kind of take in the whole atmosphere. The Ravens had a very good stream that was over on YouTube, Facebook, a bunch of other platforms. You could have tuned in and watched it. Even if you didn't watch it, I'm here to break it down for you. So don't worry. And in terms of offensive studs and duds, I mean, how can we not start with Lamar Jackson? I mean, really, there is so much hype around Lamar Jackson. There have been so many storylines around Lamar Jackson, but it's good to talk about one. It's not contract related, no drama related. And not that Lamar Jackson gets himself into drama. I'm not saying that, but other people creating drama about Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson's probably like, whoa, what did I do? Like me? Like, okay. But during this practice, Lamar Jackson just looked phenomenal. He was somebody who you could definitely see the transformation that he's been talking about, the physical transformation we'd seen. He went on NFL Network. He went on and talked a bit about his physical transformation and said he was around 205 last year and is now up to around 230-ish. So he weighs more than the list of weight of J.K. Dobbins, right up there with Gus Edwards. That was a, credit to Sarah Ellison for those stats. She does a great job over there. And, it feels like Lamar Jackson with that playing weight, there will be some that kind of falls off as he plays. Spencer Schultz talked about that last week. But the throws he made, it felt like Lamar Jackson, and I know towards the end of last season, we really didn't get a lot of that. He was, just running around for his life with an offensive line that was kind of a ragtag team at that point with injuries and pretty inconsistent play at most positions. We saw him in this practice stand in the pocket, make strong throws, a 50-yard connection to Rashad Bateman. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes. That connection just looks incredible. You had a couple of plays during the red zone portion where they were inside the 10-yard line or maybe right at the 10-yard line. And Lamar Jackson, just surveys the pocket, rolls out a little bit, kind of jukes around a little and just fires darts again. Mark Andrews, Rashad Bateman on the reciprocating end of that. They were catching those balls. So, again, Jackson looked really great. We also saw the velocity. I think what we've heard a lot of is that he's making these throws with a lot more velocity, and that was on full display as well. I was overall very impressed. So he is a stud for me, a stock up guy for me, definitely. And again, how high can that stock climb? I'm ready to see how high it can climb for sure. But moving on, Rashad Bateman, definitely another guy who was a stud. I mean, you can tell that Lamar Jackson and Rashad Bateman have been working on a connection. And they didn't really have a ton of time to do that in training camp last year. Bateman suffering that core muscle injury, had to have surgery on that, didn't return until week 6. So they kind of had some time, then there was a big delay in what they could have done. But we have seen now with the departure of Marquise Brown, Rashad Bateman has stepped up, and there has been some conversation. How ready is Rashad Bateman for the number 1 role? Can he be that guy in this offense? I absolutely think he can. And we saw him make great catches. Again, that 50-yarder that he had from Jackson. But he just seems to be now a preferred target of Lamar Jackson. Jackson seems to trust him. Bateman seems to trust Jackson. It's a mutual thing there, I feel like. And that is huge to have early on in training camp where they can continue to hone in on that. And I was overall very impressed. Again, the route running from Bateman is incredible. He's one of the better route runners in this league. I will stand by that. I think he's a player that is going to have a huge breakout second season. We were kind of talking about this situation with J.K. Dobbins last year in terms of huge second-year breakout. I think Bateman definitely has the potential to have that kind of year we were all imagining for J.K. Dobbins before his injury. And I will give an honorable mention stud to Justice Hill. Now, Hill's kind of been a forgotten man, but he looked quick. He looked like he had some burst and had a couple of pretty nice bursty runs. So kind of an honorable mention guy I'll put in there just from the running back position. But there were a lot of wide receivers here, a bunch of other studs here from that group, and include Jalen Moore, Shamar Bridges, Slade Bolden, all 3 of those guys. Jalen Moore's been around for some time now in Baltimore, so it feels like he's somebody who, again, maybe the experience puts him over the top for one of those final, whether it is 1 or 2 spots as a wide receiver. I don't know, but it seems like he's somebody who can make an impact. He had an incredible contested catch where, again, the Ravens are looking for guys, these bigger bodied wide receivers that they don't necessarily have on this roster right now that can go up, make contested catches at the catch point. That is huge for them. Jalen Moore had one of those at the practice on Saturday, so that was great to see. Shamar Bridges made a couple of really nice catches. He's been someone who a lot of people are saying is coming on recently over these first couple of practices and was impressive during minicamp and OTAs. So he's someone to watch. Fort Valley State guy, so a smaller school player, but that big-bodied mold that I was talking about. And then Slade Bolden, someone who doesn't fit that mold out of Alabama, but he was racking up the catch. He was eating all of these footballs, just sucking them in, just catching all of them. He did have a drop towards the very end of the practice, but the ball was a little out in front of him. I'm not going to put all the blame on him for that. Catch he probably should have made, but out of the whole practice, I'm definitely putting Slade Bolden in that stud category. And again, I don't necessarily put all the stock into the guy has to be 6'5", right? Slade Bolden is not 6'5". He's a smaller player. The skill set's a bit redundant to what the Ravens have on the roster. But if Slade Bolden is the most talented out of those guys, he performs the best, give me Slade Bolden. I'm not going to discredit a guy in his accomplishments or performance because of height. I've never done that. I'm not going to do that. There are plenty of players in this league who have success not being 6'4", 6'3", 6'2" receivers. And Slade Bolden, he showed that. Route running, again, he was one of those guys, he's kind of like a safety blanket almost during this practice. So I was impressed by him, definitely. Then you're looking at Mark Andrews. And again, like we all know Mark Andrews is a stud, but the connection that Lamar Jackson and Mark Andrews have fully on display on Saturday night. If you didn't know, and this might be a hot take, Lamar Jackson does like throwing to Mark Andrews. Just I know it might be too hot for you to handle, but Lamar Jackson does like throwing to Mark Andrews. He's such a reliable player. Him and Bateman are going to have a lot of targets, a lot of catches this year. We're going to see how the other guys factor in, but Mark Andrews looked good. He was somebody that you could definitely tell that connection has not grown any weaker. In fact, I think it has grown stronger. So big credit to Mark Andrews and what he was able to do, especially because, we all know how good of a player he is, right? It's not like we're going to sit here and say, oh, is Mark Andrews going to make the roster? Or is he going to have a starting spot? We know the player Mark Andrews is, but I do think at the end of the day, he's going to be a massive part of this offense, the number one pass catcher on this offense. I think Bateman comes in at number 2, so we'll see how that ends up working. And then a stock down guy for me, a dud for me, is someone who actually didn't end up practicing in Ben Cleveland. Now, there's been a lot of speculation as to why Cleveland hasn't been practicing. John Harbaugh's confirmed it a couple times here that he just hasn't passed his conditioning test. This is coming out Monday morning, and at the time of this recording, he has not passed his conditioning test. It has been 4 practices, the Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. They had off on Sunday. That he has not passed his conditioning test. And the Ravens conditioning test is a beast. Like, it is a lot to handle. But it is not a good look for Ben Cleveland. And the fact that he was, I'd say, in the thick for this left guard competition, the starting job there. Greg Roman did say Ben Powers was in the lead for that. My pick, and I'm gonna lock this in. I think Tyree Phillips is the starter week 1. I did think it was between Phillips and Cleveland, but Cleveland hasn't been out there. He hasn't been out there to prove anything, to show to his coaches, to show to his teammates that he deserves that job. I think Phillips had a lot of success last year as a guard. He's not a tackle. But don't get that idea. But I think as a guard, he is a very solid player. And I'm going to say Tyree Phillips wins that job. I don't think this is a cut Ben Cleveland situation, but I'm sure that the coaching staff is not happy that he's not able to be out there on the field because of this conditioning test. So hopefully he's able to pass it as soon as he can and get out there and compete. But I think what we'll probably end up seeing, and maybe I'm wrong here, but my hunch says that Tyree Phillips wins that job, Ben Cleveland as a backup, and then Ben Powers might get traded at the end of the offseason if there's not enough room. If there is, he stays most likely, but I think Phillips will probably take that job in my opinion. Head into our first break here on Locked On Ravens, though. Still a ton to talk about. We're going to be diving into studs and duds on the defensive side of the ball and throw some special teams guys in there too. Can't forget about the specialists. So be sure to stay tuned for that. Still a ton to talk about here on Locked On Ravens. First, though, I do want to tell you a bit about Dave. And sometimes when you look at hindsight, it can be pretty 2020 and you can't really change the past. But what if you could get a little help from your future self? Maybe you'd have to borrow a little cash, but now you can do that with Dave. And Dave is the banking app that can help you get up to $500 instantly with extra cash. That's more money to fill your tank. You can buy a wedding gift or even catch up on bills. You can finally tackle those expenses that have been stressing you out without any hangups. There's no interest and no credit check needed. And millions of people already downloaded the Dave app to get financial relief they need with extra cash. So if you're in a pinch and need some extra help, download Dave and think of it as a helping hand from future you. Download the Dave app in the App Store right now. That's DAVE. You can sign up for an extra cash account and get $500 instantly. For terms and conditions, go to dave.com/legal. Interest fees apply. Banking provided by Evolve. Member FDIC. The future you will thank you. We're back. Our second segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher, your host, still here with you. And again, thank you so much for making Locked On Ravens your first listen of the day here. Be sure to subscribe to us on YouTube. You can follow us along in audio form. You can leave a 5-star review. Also, all that greatly helps out a ton. I really appreciate all the support here. Well, let's talk about studs and does now for defense. The Ravens, obviously, their stadium practice provided a lot of highlight plays. Mostly, they were mostly offensive, and some of these drills definitely do favor the offense, and we'll talk about that in a second here. But one of the guys I want to talk about first is Travis Jones. I mean, Travis Jones has been a stud, ever since coming out of the draft, ever since back to his college days, a player that I could not tell you why he fell to 76. I just couldn't, but I'm not complaining, and the Ravens are not complaining, right? It was a blessing for them to be able to get him at that spot, and I'm really glad they did because he provides something on the defensive line that they haven't had in a couple years here, and that is the interior pass rushing presence. Jones had 8 sacks in his final 2 years at Connecticut, so he knows how to get to the quarterback and just disrupt passing plays, and he's been very impressive. Again, just being a disruptor, you could see it during the team portions, 11-on-11. He did a lot of good stuff in there, and he's been one of the standouts at camp, according to a lot of different people. So Travis Jones is somebody, and Michael Pierce gave him a huge stamp of approval, saying that, have you seen him? Did you see him tonight, is what he said after the practice. So that's a big accomplishment for Travis Jones to get that from a veteran such as Michael Pierce. So I think he's going to be really good. And might not have the biggest role week one, but I think by the end of the year, we'll be talking about him as a key rotational piece in that defense, and I think that's going to be huge for him. But it gives the Ravens another option there and someone who can disrupt plays, especially ones that, could result in some sacks, which I think is going to be really big for him. We'll talk about a couple of secondary members here, though. I'll start off with Brandon Stevens. Stevens was somebody who, again, the role for him is a little bit TBD right now. It seems like he is going to be playing a lot more corner this year. The Ravens have him listed as a defensive back, so could still be more of like a corner safety hybrid, can play down in the box a little bit, maybe from some free safety looks, but they don't need him. Right. When Deshaun Elliott went down last year, they needed to put him in there. Like, they didn't really have anybody else. They had to put him in at safety, and that's what they were going to do. But I think what the Ravens envision this year with the safety depth they now have is playing him more at corner, whether that is in the slot or on the outside, wherever they see him fit there. He's going to be playing, I think, some corner this year, and he looked good. He had a couple of breakups. He was able to really establish himself, I felt like, over the course of the practice, and I thought that he was one of those impressive guys to me that I kind of saw flash a little bit, which I think was very encouraging, because the Ravens do have some question marks in terms of some depth behind Marlon Humphrey and Marcus Peters. I think they do have a lot of it, but it's relatively inexperienced. You have Kyle Fuller, who's the veteran of that group, but then you have Stevens, who's a second-year guy. You have Jalen Armour-Davis, Pepe Williams, both first-year rookie guys. So you're kind of wondering. So I'm hoping that this is a sign to things to come for Brandon Stevens. He looked pretty good over the back half of the year last year. I think he had a pretty overall good back half of that season. But if he can continue to build on that, I think that will be very beneficial for him. And also one of the studs, I'm going to say Kyle Hamilton. Now, I'm ready. I'm going to get out my shield here. I'm going to defend Kyle Hamilton, because Kyle Hamilton is getting roasted. He's getting roasted on Twitter right now. There was a play from Bailey Gaither, one of the Ravens' new wide receiver signings. Bailey Gaither burned Kyle Hamilton. Kyle Hamilton got burnt. Like, I will tell it to you straight up. Kyle Hamilton did not have a good rep. Went viral on Twitter, and Kyle Hamilton responded to it and said, "Man, I'm getting fried on this app," which, to be fair, he kind of is. But pretty much these one-on-one drills, they favor the offense. They favor the wide receiver in this situation, because these defensive back going one-on-one, the receiver has the whole field to work with. And so while defensive backs can still make plays on the ball, I'm not saying one-on-ones only wide receivers win. Defensive backs can win those. And to be completely fair, it was not a good rep from Hamilton whatsoever. Like, I will put that out there. But people are now saying that, he's never going to be able to cover wide receivers. If he's one-on-one in coverage with wide receivers in a game, it's going to be, a touchdown or a big gain or whatever. These drills, you don't have help over the top if you're playing one-on-one against the corner press or man or whatever, or even just back, a little off coverage. You don't have that help. You're not in a full 11-on-11 setting there. So the wide receiver can do whatever. And most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time, it can result in wins for the receivers, and sometimes very big ones, like we saw with Bailey Gaither. Now, like, it was a good rep for Gaither. Like, it was a very impressive rep. Hamilton got burnt. But to put all of this on him, to say, wow, this one rep determines so much of his NFL career, when he also had a really good practice. Like, Jonas Schaefer of the Baltimore Sun put out a couple of notes on Hamilton, and some of the stuff that I saw with him too. I mean, I'll read what Jonas had to say, but Jonas said in a couple of plays from Kyle Hamilton, he spun off a block to help fill a gap on an outside run, sprinted from the slot to the middle of the field post-snap, and swapped spots with Tony Jefferson pre-snap, leading to a confused Lamar. So he was all over the place, and he's still a rookie. He's still learning. He's a player that has barely been he hasn't even played a snap. He's barely been in the league, barely had a lot of practice time. I mean, this is a player that's going to be really good. He was a pretty consensus, like, top 7, top 10 pick. Some guys had him going in the top 5, top 4. I mean, the fact that he fell to 14, again, I could talk about the Ravens draft forever and what they were able to do in that draft. Like, it was incredible. But to be able to get a player like that, to have the safety depth they do, one bad rep from Kyle Hamilton should not overshadow what he's been able to do over the rest of either that practice, the open practice, or training camp, or OTAs, or mini camp, or whatever. He has impressed. I was impressed by him. He looked fluid. So I'm going to put him as a stud for the practice on Saturday. And then looking at I'll say we'll go dud on defense and special teams, guys. A dud for me on defense is Kevon Seymour. Now, it's very unfortunate, but Kevon Seymour, I think, has been in almost, if not every highlight play that has happened for the Ravens. I mean, it's been a lot. he's been in a lot of these highlight plays, getting burned. I mean, he got burned by James Prochet. He's had a couple of those like play of the day that the Ravens put out. They do a really good job with those. The play of the days, he's been a couple of those back shoulder throws, guys in coverage. He's been that guy in coverage. So it hasn't been a great start to training camp for Kevon Seymour. It seems like I feel like they really like him and could be an option on the practice squad. I don't have him making I didn't have him making the roster outright even before training camp started. So even before all this happened, but he's had a pretty rough go of things, all things considered, when you're talking about just all the highlight plays people have seen. And I mean, from the play of the days to the training camp, which was broadcast out there for everybody to see, right, there are a lot of plays where Kevon Seymour got burned. So I'm going to put him as a dud down. I don't see him making the roster unless there's a very strong preseason and the Ravens feel like they have to keep an extra cornerback. But I just think numbers-wise, he's on the outside looking in for me. They're not going to get rid of Pepe Williams or Jalen Armour-Davis or Kyle Fuller or any of those guys. I think they keep 6 guys, and one of those is Brandon Stevens. So that's where I am on Kevon Seymour. Looking at the special teams, I mean, Jordan Stout had a couple of booming punts, was feeling himself, and would have, I'd say, pinned the opposing offense back within the 10. He's a player that is going to be mentored a lot by Sam Cook, one of the most consistent players in Ravens history. So you love that aspect of everything. But he's also somebody who he has that swagger to him, it feels like. And Sam Cook was very not that either way is bad. I'm not saying that, but Sam Cook was, he was very down to business, down to earth, get stuff done. And Jordan Stout is too. He's very serious about what he does, but he is a very versatile player in terms of the fact that at Penn State, he punted, he kicked, he held, he did kickoffs. He was doing everything for that team. So there's a lot to like about him, and what I saw in practice from him was also really good. And then Justin Tucker, talking about a stud. I mean, again, you're talking stock up. Like, how high can Justin Tucker's stock go? It's pretty up there. But he was nailing 60-yard field goals. I mean, he's doing Justin Tucker things. He is not slowing down anytime soon, and hopefully we don't see a retirement from him. I know the Sam Cook retirement was tough. I mean, it was kind of like a bittersweet thing because you're losing such a great player in Cook, but bringing in a new guy in Stout, it could be great. The Ravens with Tucker, I mean, the best kicker in NFL history, in my opinion. That's a guy that you want to have around for a long time and hopefully can continue to play at a high level. But in the practice on Saturday, he showed it. So a lot of great players in that practice on Saturday at M&T Bank Stadium, a great atmosphere. They had the fireworks and the laser show afterwards. And that's always a fun thing that they do with the fireworks. And I think for the Ravens, they have a lot of promise. The practice showed a lot of promise, and I think for what they're able to do with the players they have, they'll be able to bounce back, in my humble opinion. But we'll still have a ton to talk about here coming up on the show. We're going to be diving into the whole dynamic of practice changing with pads coming on, what that means, some guys I'd like to hear a bit more from in terms of their contributions during training camp and more. So be sure to stay tuned. Still a ton to talk about here on Locked On Ravens. First, though, I do want to tell you a bit about BetOnline. BetOnline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your betting needs. You can find all your favorite sports and events at the #1 online source for odds, lines, and games. You can find reviews and news of every league. That includes Major League Baseball. You have the NFL, NBA, combat sports, NHL, esports, and even golf. BetOnline continues to be the top online resource for all your sports wagering information, from live in-game betting, scores, and podcasts. They have you covered. So head to BetOnline today or use the mobile device to learn more about the trends in action happening today. BetOnline, where the game starts. We're back. Our final segment here at Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher, your host, still here with you again. Thank you so much for making Locked On Ravens your first listen today. Be sure to make your second listen Locked On NFL. I host the Monday show over there. We talk about Deebo Samuel, DK Metcalf, Julio Jones, a very wide receiver-centric episode over there. So be sure to check that out. We talk with experts from around the network, and I take you through the whole Deebo Samuel thing, which broke pretty late at night on Sunday night. So we talk about all of that there. But now the second week of training camp kicks off. Well, I guess we're still in the first week since training camp did start on Wednesday. I guess we have to get to Thursday before the first week is officially over. But another week here, and now the pads come on. It's different. It's different when the pads come on. A lot of players say they want to work with the pads on, and it makes a lot of sense. The physical aspect, the hitting aspect. But when pads come on, it gives you a much greater idea of what you have when you're a coaching staff. When you have these players who are trying to figure out the strengths and weaknesses of their game, how much they've progressed. When the pads come on, things get a little more serious. The competitive nature flows a little bit more, and this is a very competitive team, right? The Ravens have a lot of competitors. Lamar Jackson, one of the most competitive people on that team in the NFL, honestly, probably. J.K. Dobbins, we've seen his competitive spirit over the past couple of days. in terms of trying to get back on the practice field. But with the pads coming on, it does give a lot more, I think, show in terms of what the offensive line can do, the defensive line can do, linebackers. It gives a ton in that regard because guys can just get physical with each other. It stimulates that game action more. And obviously, look, they're not going to go super hard at practice for the entire time. It's not just going to be hitting. And the Ravens, with them being much more cautious in terms of the approach this year with practices, having the afternoon practices and a little bit more of the install periods and not as much 11 on 11 or 7 on 7, etc. They're going to probably do things a bit differently with the pads on than they've done in previous years. We've seen a couple guys across the league go down in terms of injuries. Ryan Jensen, Micah Hyde, a couple of big name players. So the Ravens want to avoid that as much as possible because we saw what happened last training camp where it wasn't just, the big ones obviously later in the off season with Marcus Peters and Gus Edwards, J.K. Dobbins, but we saw it before. Rashad Bateman going down. Jimmy Smith missed a lot of time. Kevin Zeitler, missed some time. Bradley Bozeman. So there were players that were kind of in and out and in and out and in and out. And you don't want to have that. Obviously, look, there are going to be injuries in football. Hopefully those don't happen in training camp, but they can happen at any time. They really can. Non-contact, contact. So the pads coming on, it'll give a new dynamic, but I think it'll be interesting to see what a new dynamic is in terms of the actual practices that the Ravens have and what they're able to do. Because, pads they're an important part of training camp, just getting them on and being able to see what you have. But there are a couple guys I would like to hear a little bit more about, to be completely honest. I feel like guys like Mekhi Polk, who was one of those receivers who I was really excited about. And again, I'm not saying these guys are having bad training camps. I'm just saying I feel like it'd be awesome to hear them making a big play or something like that, right? Mekhi Polk, we've heard about Shamar Bridges, Slade Bolden, Devin Williams, right? I'd love to hear about Mekhi Polk a little bit more. He was a very intriguing guy to be out of Mississippi State. I think he can make a huge impact, honestly. One guy I'm intrigued about is Josh Oliver. With the whole Charlie Kohler thing, maybe he has to start the year on IR, and that opens up an opportunity because I still think the Ravens keep 4 tight ends. But if Kohler has to go on IR, I think that Oliver could be that guy, and I think he is that guy. If the Ravens do have to keep 4, but Kohler's on IR, I'm giving that spot to Oliver. So I'm interested to hear about that. I think on the defense, I'd like to hear about Malik Harrison. He's a guy that I think is in a big year. I'm not going to call it make or break. I'm not going to say that, but I think it is a big year for him overall based off of, kind of, I don't want to say underwhelming production because we've seen the flashes, but I think people were expecting a bit more out of him. Patrick Queen is someone, again, this gives more opportunity. The pass coming on gives more opportunity for the lines, the linebackers to make some plays. Patrick Queen, someone who, after a couple of seasons of up and down play, and we saw him finish the year strong in 2021, that's a guy that I think, again, we saw him in that first preseason game last year against New Orleans, just go out and just dominate, right? Reading screens, looking fast, having confidence. If he can pick that up in training camp, and I'm sure he has it, you can translate over to the preseason, hopefully over to the regular season. That's going to be something that's really, really huge. Kyle Fuller, another one who I think would be interesting to hear a little bit about in terms of what he's been able to do and what he hopefully will be able to do in training camp. He had I call it a mixed practice on Saturday. I think he made some plays. He also got burned a couple times, had some catches completed on him. So he's somebody, I think. Also the 2 rookies, Armour-Davis and Pepe Williams, 2 guys who I'm really excited about based off of potentially what their roles could be. I think they'll probably be more special teams centric in year 1 just because of the depth that they do have. But we have heard this story before, and we've heard it a lot, where the Ravens keep 50 million corners and end the year with 2. So maybe they'll have to be thrust into some roles where maybe Pepe Williams is playing the slot some, or maybe you have Jalen Armour-Davis playing on the outside. So we'll see. We'll see what ends up happening with those guys. Geno Stone, Geno Stone had the pick 6. He's somebody who we have heard about, but I think, again, with him, it feels like he's pretty far ahead of Armour-Davis Washington, just because, again, Armour-Davis Washington hasn't been out there to prove himself, and I have it right now as a 1 roster spot battle between Stone and Washington for the final spot on the roster. And if Washington isn't out there to play, and Stone is making plays, then I think it probably goes to Geno Stone, which I think Stone, again, very talented, has some experience, has made some plays in games at the NFL level. So with the Ravens having that safety depth there, I think you can definitely keep a guy like Stone and feel really, really good about it. But maybe this is a situation where the Ravens, if Washington's foot injury isn't really healing the way they want it to, or something, they could maybe stash him on IR for the year and bring him back next year and figure it all out. But yeah, I think for me, Geno Stone is someone who I'm definitely intrigued about. And then some of these undrafted guys. I mean, Jeremiah Moons, Kobe McLean are the two I have making the Ravens roster right now. You have Chuck Wiley. I did talk about Mekhi Polk, but more defensively, some of those inside and outside linebackers. Josh Ross, another one who I think is really interesting. So you look at those players. When the Pats come on, this is an opportunity. It's an opportunity for all these undrafted guys to prove to the Ravens coaching staff that they deserve spots on this roster. And it doesn't all come down to that, right? It comes down to the preseason, how you can perform in the live action games. But we'll be able to see, I think, a lot of these younger players because of what I anticipate probably happening with the preseason, which is the Ravens aren't going to be playing a lot of their veterans during any of the games. And these injured players are turning hopefully soon, like maybe J.K. Dobbins or Ronnie Stanley, Marcus Peters, Gus Edwards. They're not going to play at all. That's probably not going to happen. So we're going to see a lot of these young guys being able to prove themselves, but it's stacking days, right? Stacking practices. And that's what's really important in these situations. So I'm excited to dive into another week of covering training camp here on this show. We'll bring on guests. We'll dive into their observations as well. So we'll talk about a lot more throughout the rest of the week here on Locked On Ravens. But that's all I have for you here today on this episode of Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning in again. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel here. Follow us in audio form. Thank you so much. When we get back here tomorrow, we're diving into more Ravens content, diving into more training camps observations. So be sure to stay tuned for that, and I will see you right back here tomorrow.